My family wants me to forgive my brother, who assaulted my fiancée right under my parents' roof. My name is Jack, I am 27 years old, and I met my fiancée, Emily, who is 25, nearly 7 years ago when we were both in college. We got introduced through mutual friends, and about a year later, we started dating. When Emily met my family, they absolutely loved her, especially my dad, who is usually slow to warm up to people outside our close-knit community. My mom, while a bit reserved around anyone who was not part of our community, was even charmed by Emily. For context, my parents are immigrants who arrived in the United States decades ago and have always stayed connected with people from their culture. While this sometimes makes them hesitant around outsiders, it is more about comfort than anything else. At this point, I need to talk about my older brother, Mike. He is 29 now, and before everything went sideways, he was like my hero. Growing up, I looked up to him for his confidence and courage. He always stood his ground, even when neighborhood kids tried to pick on us. Mike used to tell me and our younger sister, Sophie, to never bow our heads just because someone tried to bring us down. He would remind us we had every right to live our lives as much as anyone else. When I introduced Emily to Mike, they got along great. They became friends quickly, which, at the time, I thought was just more proof of what an awesome person Mike was. Over time, Emily became very close with my family. She would go shopping with Sophie and my mom, hang out with me and my cousins over a game of pool, and was a regular at every single family gathering we held. It was at one of those family parties where everything started to unravel. That night, everyone, including me, got way too drunk. I passed out on the living room floor at my parents' house. Emily had stayed up longer, and when the party ended, she seemed off. Something was wrong. I asked her what was going on, and after hesitating for a moment, she said, "I think Mike tried to kiss me." Hearing those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Any trace of alcohol in my system seemed to disappear instantly. I sat her down and asked her to tell me everything. She explained that some of the guests had gone up to the roof to drink and enjoy the breeze. One by one, the group left until it was just her and Mike up there. They kept drinking and talking for a bit, but then she noticed him staring at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Suddenly, without warning, he leaned in and tried to kiss her. Thankfully, she dodged him, but the whole situation left her feeling so uneasy that she immediately came back downstairs. After Emily finished her story, I drove her home. I spent the rest of the night seething. The next day, I confronted Mike about what happened. To his credit, he did not deny it. He admitted to everything and apologized, saying he was so drunk he had not been thinking straight. Even now, just remembering that conversation makes my blood boil. At the time, though, I naively thought it was just a stupid mistake, something that could be addressed with a firm conversation and boundaries. I could not have imagined what was coming next. After the incident, things between me and Mike became strained. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was polite but distant, like we were strangers. The only other person who knew about what had happened was Sophie. She found out when she noticed the tension between Mike and me and asked Emily about it. Emily ended up telling her the whole story. We decided not to tell the rest of the family. We did not want to risk tearing everything apart. A few months later, my family threw another big party. This one was a much bigger event, with lots of relatives, friends, and neighbors from the community. I figured enough time had passed since the incident, and maybe this was a chance for things to feel normal again. During the party, I lost track of Emily for a little while. I figured she was probably with Sophie, but I had a weird feeling and decided to check upstairs. As I walked up the stairs, I heard noises coming from one of the bedrooms. I opened the door to find Mike pushing Emily onto the bed. He was covering her mouth and trying to force his hand under her dress while she fought to get away. I saw red. I did not even think, I just launched myself at Mike and started hitting him as hard as I could. Emily ran out of the room and went downstairs to get help. By the time my dad and uncles came upstairs, Mike's face was covered in blood, and my knuckles were raw. My dad had to physically pull me off of him. Even then, I was shouting at Mike and trying to hit him. Eventually, my dad dragged me out of the room while my uncles stayed behind to check on Mike's injuries. Outside, my dad asked me what had happened. It took me a moment to find the words, but finally, I told him, I just saw Mike trying to force himself on Emily. My dad was stunned. He sat on the floor with his head in his hands, completely silent. After a while, my uncles called him to help take Mike to the hospital. Meanwhile, I went to find Emily. She was downstairs with Sophie, explaining what had just happened. I told Sophie goodbye, and Emily and I left. On the way home, Emily cried the entire time. She was angry, confused, and heartbroken. When we got home, she cried herself to sleep. This became her routine for the next few days until she was finally able to speak again. In the weeks after the incident, I cut off nearly all contact with the outside world and focused entirely on helping Emily. To say she was struggling would be an understatement. She was terrified of what had happened and completely drained emotionally. For the first month, she stayed home, but eventually, she had to go back to work. That first day, though, she only made it a few hours before coming back home in tears. She said she could not shake the feeling that someone was watching her, like she was in constant danger, and that something bad might happen to her at any moment. After calming her down, I suggested that maybe the best thing for her would be to see a professional, a therapist. She resisted the idea at first, but after a little more time and reassurance, she agreed. Looking back, it was the best decision we could have made. Emily started showing signs of improvement not long after she began therapy. About 2 months into her sessions, her therapist suggested that I consider attending some sessions as well. The therapist felt that not only could I better understand how to support Emily, but it might also help me address the way I had been shutting myself off from the world. At first, I thought the idea was odd, but I decided to give it a shot. I remember Emily teasing me a little, saying, "You are only doing it because you like to follow orders," but I knew she was just nervous about how it might go for me. I will never forget my first session. It was a mess. All the emotions I had bottled up came flooding out. I was furious, not just with Mike for what he had done, but with myself. I kept blaming myself for not recognizing the signs earlier, for not protecting Emily the way I always promised I would. Most of all, I felt powerless. The thought that something like this could happen again was eating me alive. After several sessions, things finally started to look up. Emily and I both became stronger mentally and emotionally. We even decided to take self-defense classes together. A few weeks ago, I proposed to her. When I shared the news with my family, everyone seemed genuinely happy for us except my mom. She stayed quiet through most of the conversation and, later, when no one else was around, asked if we could speak privately. Once we were alone, she started by saying how happy she was for Emily and me. But then she dropped a bombshell. She told me that she had been in contact with Mike since the pandemic began. Apparently, he had reached out to check on her and my dad and had told her how sorry he was for everything. She went on to say that he had offered to help them in any way he could and that he was trying to make things right. But the thing that made my blood boil was what she said next. "I think it is time for you to forgive your brother." I did not let her finish. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out. When I got home, I told Emily what my mother had said. She was as angry and hurt as I was. We both could not believe that my mom would even think to ask that of me. In the days that followed, I kept getting more and more questions from relatives. People asked if I had talked to Mike, if we were reconnecting, or if we had patched things up. I tried to ignore it, but then, 4 days ago, my mother called again. This time, she told me she had spoken to Mike about my engagement and that he was planning to come to town next week to have a talk with me. I lost it. I told her she had no right to tell him about my engagement or invite him into our lives. Then, I hung up the phone. I have not spoken to her since. Since then, some relatives have told me that maybe my mom is right and that I should consider giving Mike a second chance. Yesterday, my dad called me to say the same thing. He told me I needed to be a good brother and at least try to forgive him. I feel like everyone has completely forgotten what Mike did. They act like 4 years is enough time to sweep it all under the rug, but I cannot understand how they can think like that. Right now, I am at my breaking point. I feel betrayed by my family, and I cannot see any path that leads to me forgiving my brother. I wrote this because I needed to let these feelings out somewhere. My therapist appointment was postponed, and I had no one else to vent to. Maybe posting online is not the most professional way to handle this, but I needed to say something. To anyone reading this, thank you for listening. Notable comment from someone that sums this up. So your mom is asking you to forgive a predator? Does her reserved attitude toward your fiancé play into this? Would she have the same response if this happened to your sister? Probably not. Your family is willing to sacrifice you, your fiancé, and your relationship just to keep the peace with a predator. That is unforgivable. Honestly, you should cut ties with them. They have already shown you where their priorities lie. Your fiancé now knows they do not stand with her or you. They are asking her to sit at the same table as the man who assaulted her and act like nothing happened. Your mother does not believe her. She thinks it is just a misunderstanding, or she excuses it as drunken behavior. Do not let them manipulate you into believing this was anything less than what it was. Your mother straight up disgusts me as a fellow woman, as a fellow parent, and as a fellow member of society. It is over with them. They made their choice, and it was not your side they picked. My advice? Leave town and start over. If your brother comes back, your fiancé might never feel safe enough to step foot off your porch again. Update: my family wants me to forgive my brother after he tried to assault my fiancé. Hi, everyone. Honestly, I never thought I would be writing an update, let alone this soon. When I first posted, I just needed a space to vent. I never expected such an overwhelming response or the incredible kindness you all showed me and my fiancé. Thank you. I especially want to thank those who sent us good wishes and encouragement. It means the world. I also want to clear up a few things based on the questions some of you raised. First, I want to make one thing very clear: I am never going to forgive my brother. If it was not obvious in my first post, let me say it again: he is no longer my brother. As far as I am concerned, that man died to me 4 years ago. Second, most of my family does not believe in forgiving him either. It is just a small group, mostly my parents, who think reconciliation is possible. Everyone else has been supportive of me and my fiancé, and I could easily cut ties with the people pushing for me to forgive, except for my parents. Third, to clarify, my younger sister is absolutely on my side. She is my fiancé's best friend and has been a huge source of support since day one. She is the only person who truly understands how much my fiancé suffered after the incident. Now, to address a common question: why is my brother not in jail? The short answer is that after I beat him to the point that he had to go to the hospital, pressing charges would have backfired on me. I consulted a lawyer friend, and she explained that if I pursued legal action against my brother, he could claim excessive force and drag me into court with him. On top of that, my girlfriend at the time, now my fiancé, was not emotionally prepared to testify. At that moment, my priority was her well-being. The best we could do back then was to get a restraining order, which we both still have. My parents do not know about the restraining order, so if my brother were to show up unannounced, the police would immediately get involved. Some people suggested that my mother's attitude might have to do with the fact that Emily is not from our community, but I can confidently say that is not the case. This is not about where Emily is from, it is about my mother refusing to accept the truth about her son. Now, let me explain how I handled my family's expectations of forgiveness. Before all this, I had already planned to tell my family that I would never forgive my brother. I even prepared an ultimatum for my parents, where I told them they would have to choose between their son, a man who tried to assault my fiancé, or me and their daughter. But while reading comments on my previous post, I came across something that shook me to my core. Some people pointed out how bold my brother must have been to try something so awful in a house full of people. Combined with my parents' recent behavior, I started to wonder, what if my brother had done this before? And what if my parents had covered it up? That question hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never considered that possibility before. It was clear that something was weighing on me because Emily noticed and asked me what was on my mind. I told her about the possibility and asked if she wanted me to delete the post. She read the comments and decided I should leave it up. She said she appreciated the kindness from strangers, and the supportive messages made her feel less alone. When I told her about the possibility that my brother might have tried or succeeded in doing this to others, she got visibly upset. A shiver ran down her spine. Together, we told my sister, and then we started asking questions, first to family members who supported us, and then to friends and people from our community. So far, no one in our family has any memories of my brother behaving this way toward other relatives. Friends, however, had different stories. Some friends recalled my brother being overly kind or touchy around girlfriends of other family members. While it never seemed to cross the line, it made a few people uncomfortable in hindsight. The most significant discovery came when my sister reached out to the sister of one of my brother's ex-girlfriends. She described my brother as strange around her family and said that her sister, his ex, always seemed unusually quiet and nervous whenever he was nearby. She also mentioned that my brother was too flirty with her, the sister. We also reached out to one of my brother's former co-workers. She told us about a company party where my brother left with another co-worker who was very drunk. The next morning, that co-worker could not remember much about the night before. This entire situation has made me realize that my brother was never the person I thought he was. For those of you who asked, when my parents brought up the idea of forgiving him, I was very direct. I told them that if I knew he was in town, I would cut ties with them and never speak to them again. As for what my brother has been up to these past years, here is what I know. According to my mother, he contacted her at the beginning of the pandemic. He had moved to the other side of the country, changed his name, and started therapy, supposedly to reform himself. Beyond that, I do not know much, and neither does my sister. We never asked our parents for more details. Some of you also asked why my brother is not in jail. I want to address that here. The short answer is because I attacked him after catching him trying to assault Emily. I beat him so badly he had to go to the hospital. When I spoke to a lawyer about pressing charges, she told me it was risky. My brother could argue excessive force, which would likely lead to me facing legal trouble, too. On top of that, my then-girlfriend, now fiancé, was not in the right emotional state to testify. Her well-being was my priority, so I chose not to pursue legal action. The best thing we could do at that time was secure a restraining order against him. One of the reasons I have not updated sooner is because we still have that restraining order in place. My parents do not know about it, so if my brother were to show up unannounced, the police would immediately get involved. Some people speculated that my mother's attitude toward this situation might have something to do with Emily not being from our community. I can assure you that is not the case. My mother's behavior stems from her refusal to accept that her son is capable of such terrible actions. Now, let us talk about what everyone seems to be expecting from me: forgiveness. I had already prepared something to say to my family. I planned to give my parents an ultimatum: choose between their son, a man who tried to assault my fiancée, or me and their daughter. But as I was reading through comments on my last post, something even worse began to gnaw at me. Many people pointed out how confident my brother must have been to try what he did in a house full of people. They also questioned whether this was an isolated incident or if my parents knew about similar behavior from him in the past and covered it up. That idea hit me like a ton of bricks. I had never thought about that possibility before, but it made an awful kind of sense. Emily noticed something was bothering me and asked what was on my mind. After some hesitation, I told her about my suspicions. She shuddered at the thought. We decided we needed to find out the truth. We told my sister about our concerns, and together, we started asking questions. We spoke to family members who supported us, friends, and even people in the community, trying to find out if anyone had ever noticed anything unusual about my brother's behavior. So far, none of our family members could recall anything specific. However, when we started talking to friends, we got a different story. Several friends mentioned that my brother was overly friendly with girlfriends or wives of other family members. They said he would sometimes act a little too touchy or flirty, though no one described anything that crossed the line into assault. The breakthrough came when my sister reached out to the sister of one of my brother's ex-girlfriends. She told us that my brother had always acted strangely around her family. She said her sister, his ex, became very quiet and withdrawn whenever he was around, and she noticed that he was inappropriately flirty with her, the sister. We also spoke to one of my brother's former co-workers. She told us about a company party where my brother left with another coworker who was very drunk. The next morning, that coworker could not remember much about what had happened. Hearing these stories has completely shattered the image I had of my brother. He is not the person I once admired. He is a danger to everyone around him. Since yesterday, my fiancée, sister, and I, along with others who want to help, have been gathering all the evidence we can against my brother. Once we are ready, we plan to make everything public to share it with our community, on social media, and anywhere else it will be seen. I have not confronted my parents about any of this yet. Tomorrow morning, I plan to sit down with them and lay everything out. I am also going to give them an ultimatum. If we find out that anyone knew about my brother's actions and chose to cover for him, they will face consequences, too. This is not how I imagined spending the weeks following my engagement, but this is something I cannot let slide. I may not update for a while, or at least not with major updates, until my brother is facing the consequences of his actions. My fiancée, Emily, has been my strength through this entire ordeal. She has stood by me every step of the way, and I have done my best to be there for her too. I cannot imagine how she feels now, but I could not be prouder of her for confronting her trauma and showing such resilience in the face of everything. Update 2, my family wants me to forgive my brother after he tried to assault my fiancée. Hi again, everyone. I know it has been a while since my last update, but I wanted to wait until the matter was fully resolved before posting. First, I want to thank everyone who has supported me, my fiancé, and the other victims throughout this process. Your kind words, advice, and shared stories helped us more than I can express. Now, onto the main update. My brother is finally facing justice for what he has done. After my last post, Emily, some close friends, and I decided to dig deeper into my brother's past to find out if he had harmed other women. Once we gathered the evidence, we were determined to ensure he would finally face the consequences of his actions. By the time we were done, we had uncovered 8 cases, including Emily's. These involved ex-girlfriends, ex-coworkers, and even 2 current coworkers of his. Each of these women had either been assaulted or harassed by my brother. Initially, our plan was to confront my parents with the evidence and post everything on social media. However, our lawyer strongly advised against both actions. She warned us that if we shared the evidence with my parents, there was a risk they would try to protect my brother, which could jeopardize everything we had worked for. Similarly, posting the information online could open us up to defamation claims, which would complicate things unnecessarily. Because of this, I decided to go completely no contact with my parents. I could no longer trust them and did not want to risk them interfering. Here, I want to acknowledge my younger sister, Sophie. She played a critical role during this time by pretending to stay neutral with my parents while secretly helping Emily and me gather information. She learned quite a bit about what my brother had been up to after the incident. Here is what she uncovered. After the party where I caught him assaulting Emily, my brother moved to the other side of the country to stay with a friend. At the time, my family had the good sense to turn their backs on him. While living there, he spread lies about why he had been disowned, telling people that it was because he had been having an affair with my girlfriend. Yes, he actually had the nerve to twist the story that way. He first contacted my parents again at the end of 2021, during the height of the pandemic. Since then, he and my mother have been in regular contact, and my parents even visited him a few times. The most shocking discovery: my brother has a daughter. Apparently, the child was the result of a one-night stand. My brother got a woman pregnant in April 2021. They agreed to co-parent because neither wanted to get married, and the child, a girl, was born in December of that year. 2 weeks before we finished gathering evidence, my brother introduced his daughter and her mother to my parents and Sophie. At first, I could not believe what Sophie was telling me, but then she showed me pictures of my brother with the child and her mother. It was like being hit with a wave of cold water. Not only had my parents been hiding this from me, but now my brother's actions were impacting an innocent child. That realization made it even more urgent to pursue justice. I could not let his daughter or her mother be at risk of harm. Finally, the day came. My brother was at my parents' house when the police arrived. According to Sophie, the moment the officers knocked, he panicked and tried to run. He was caught, tossed, and arrested. His attempt to resist added charges of aggression against a police officer to his record. After 2 days in holding, my brother was transferred to a prison to await trial. The trial itself was one of the hardest experiences of my life. 8 women testified against my brother. 2 of them broke down in tears as they described what he had done to them. Emily, on the other hand, managed to maintain a straight face during her testimony. But later, when we were alone, she completely broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her, trying to comfort her, even though I felt like breaking down myself. Hearing all the stories of what my brother had done filled me with a mix of anger and sadness. The damage he caused to so many lives is something I will never forget. My parents and Sophie were also called to testify. Seeing my parents in court, still subtly defending him, broke something inside me. I realized, in that moment, that my relationship with them was beyond repair. After a week of testimony, the court reached its verdict. My brother was found guilty on all 8 charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Of course, his lawyer tried to accuse me of using excessive force the night of the incident with Emily, but the judge dismissed it. The court recognized the context and the danger my brother posed. As for my niece, her mother was initially in denial. But after we showed her the evidence, she was horrified. She immediately cut ties with my brother and has since been taking steps to protect herself and her daughter. Sophie has been my rock throughout this ordeal. While losing my relationship with my parents has been painful, I know it was the right decision. I cannot trust them anymore. Now that my brother is behind bars, it feels like a weight has been lifted. Not just for me and Emily, but for all the women he hurt. To everyone who supported us, thank you. Your words gave us the strength to keep going. This chapter of our lives is finally over, and while it is not the future I imagined, it is a new beginning. Emily and I can now focus on building a future together without the shadow of my brother looming over us. To anyone who has been through something similar, you are not alone. There are people who will stand by you and help you. Speak up. Seek justice. You deserve to be heard. Thank you all again.